Welcome back, everybody. Cam here from Edmunds Woodshop. So in this video, I want to go over some of the discussions that I've had with you all and some of the members in the OMTech Polar users group on Facebook. And more specifically, I want to talk about the frustrations that people are feeling when it comes to running the OMTech Polar in lightburn. So to be specific, I'm talking about the directional movements, the focusing, and maybe the errors that people get, because when you get a red ring on the push button, you don't know what that error is. So just to be upfront, this is going to be a small investment, but it will make your life so much easier when it comes to the functionality and how you work your machine, and it'll just bring a lot more fun into the process. So let's go ahead and get started, and I'll show you what it's all about. So the first thing that I want to do is introduce you guys to this Ruida control panel. So what this is a controller that basically plugs into your Ruida control board for the RDC 6442S, which every Polar should have. So why would you want this? Well, you have the ability to control the directional movements of your laser head. So if you press the arrow left, your laser head will go left. If you press it right, it will go right. Up and down will move the gantry up and down. And you have the ability to also set your Z focus height. So that's important because now you can manually focus instead of having to use the offset and lightburn. You would just use a simple focal gauge and put it between your laser nozzle and your workpiece, and you're focused. And you can do that for any material, every time. There's no doing calculations, it's just using a focal piece. Another thing is now you have this screen. Well, keep in mind that I have everything powered down to save you from the noise, but when this screen lights up, it shows a menu that gives you all sorts of options for the things that you can do. But one of the biggest highlights for this screen is now you have the ability to visually see any errors that might pop up. So what I'm talking about is when you get that red ring on your push button and you don't know what the error is, it will tell you directly what that error is. So if it's a slop error, out of boundaries error, water error, you'll know exactly what is happening and you can start troubleshooting based off that. So if we zoom in closer on the controller, you'll see a lot more buttons, right? So you have a reset. So if you were to press the reset, your laser head, wherever it's at, it will go back to its XYZ coordinates and zero itself out. It will home itself out, okay? You'll see a pulse button. So now you'll be able to test fire your laser to see if it's working. You can set your speed. So if your laser head's moving too fast in the rails for you, you can set your speed. Your min and max power, that's for your pulsing. And file. So if you send files from lightburn, you can send it to your controller and you can store it here and you can start them here as well. You have an origin button to set your user origin in your job origin settings. You can frame, and then you have your escape and enter buttons for when you're actually working inside the menu. So you have a lot more capability, a lot more freedom if you choose to get one of these. So now I'm going to show you some examples of the movements and turn this on, and I'm going to turn the sound down and the music up. So just pay attention to the keys that I press, and we'll go from there. Back in lightburn, and I am going to use the send button to send this file to the controller, and I'm going to call it test.
And what I'm trying to do here is intentionally cause an error so you can see the message on the screen pop up. So we can verify it by seeing the word test here on the controller. And if I use the start button on the controller, it will try to start the file, but it will cause an error as indicated by the red ring. And now that we have the controller here, we can see the actual error message on the screen, and we can troubleshoot from there. So now we're going to go over the access and installation of the control panel, and we're going to do that by removing the left cover, and it's held in place by these two screws that I'm undoing right now. Now keep in mind, yes, my cover is broken. I removed the cover and dropped it and shattered the glass, but it's still highly functional. So once you get these screws removed, you're going to have to remove the LED light wire right here. And then there's also a door sensor wire that you're going to have to unplug. Once you get those plugs undone, you can simply just pop the cover right off. You might have to push the outside wall out a little bit, and then it comes right off. Okay, so now that we have the cover off, I'm going to go ahead and zoom in here. I'm going to push the gantry back a little bit. And we want to access the Ruida control board that's underneath this panel. Now, you might see these dots, these 3 dots, and these are magnets. And you're going to have bolts at each location. So you're going to have to grab your Allen wrench set, and you're going to have to find the Allen wrench that fits and then unbolt each of these screws. Now, if you want to do what I did, I'll provide you the link for this magnet set, and you can just glue the magnets in the proper spot. So now you can quickly access this panel, pull it right off, and you can clean the control board whenever you need to. Okay, and the magnets they just magnetize to these little pegs right here. So there is your Ruida control board. Now, there is an HM1 port, and that's where your panel is going to get plugged in to. So this is the plug right there. It's kind of a tight spot, so you're going to have to finagle it and get it to plug in there, and it will just get plugged in right there. Now, we can't have the controller hanging with the wire over the rail, okay? So what I'm almost thinking is that I will probably drill a hole on the side, an access hole, and I will probably have it go through the side over here just so it's underneath the gantry, out of the way of the gantry as it comes up and down the Y-axis. So I decided to go ahead and give it a try and cut this little pass-through hole right there just to show you guys what to expect. So now I have enough room for the connector for the control panel. So if I were to pass it right through, I can now connect it to the HM1 spot. But I just want to go over real quick how I did this, just so you guys can understand the process. So I'm going to zoom out here and kind of discuss this. So I took just a standard drill, right? And I grabbed an old set of drill bits, hopefully you got one, right? And I started by making a pilot hole, and then I worked up through the sizes just because it makes it for an easier process to drill the holes into some metal. I made 2 of those holes, and let me show you if I bring this camera over to the side here. Okay, so I made 2 holes, one here, but you're like, okay, well, why is it rectangular? Well, I used a scroll saw with a metal cutting blade, and then I just squared it off, okay? And then I just used some Gorilla Tape to tape off these edges of the opening because they could be sharp, and you don't want to damage your cord. But some thick Gorilla Tape, duct tape, will work just fine. So let's go ahead and go through the process of installing it, and we're going to start by sticking the connector
through here.
So as that connector comes through, make sure you're pulling extra line to give yourself some slack so you can work that connector in place. So now we're going to grab the cover to our control board and screw it back in place, unless you chose to upgrade to magnets, and then it will just snap into place. Then we begin the process of putting the cover back on. So that just means reconnecting the LED strip and connecting the door sensor plug. And then we're going to go ahead and put in both screws to hold the cover in place. And then we're going to turn on the laser and do one last test to make sure everything's fully functional. And it is. So when you first turn on your control panel, you might find that it is in a different language. And to address that, we're going to go into the menu options by pressing the ZU button here. And then we're going to scroll down to the upper right box there. Press the down arrow key. And once we get there, we are going to go ahead and press enter. And that will be your language choices. And from there, you just press English and hit enter. And now the next time you go into your menu options, by pressing ZU, you'll see that everything is in English.
So now that we have our controller set up, there are a couple ways to set the focus distance between your laser nozzle to your workpiece without having to mess with the offsets and light burn. So this is how you do it. All right, so if you grab your toolbox that came with your laser, there is a little plastic ruler that came in there. And you'll notice it has a couple markings. It has the 50.8 marking and the 63.5 marking. And these are your focal distances, right? So you have a stock 2-inch focal distance lens. And that means from the lens to the workpiece, that's going to be 2 inches. And so to gauge that, you would actually take your workpiece in there, right? You would take your ruler and you would take this 50.8 edge and reference it off the top of the frame. So if I zoom in here, you can see that it's resting on top, but there's a little gap there, right? So that's where you would take the controller and you would move the Z-axis until the bottom of this ruler is touching the top of that surface. And that will establish a rough focus. Now I say rough because if I zoom this back out and take my calipers, we go to measure this actual distance. Okay, we go to measure this actual distance right there, and notice it says 49.03. Okay, that means it is off by a full millimeter. So will it get you focused? Yeah, but it will get you rough focus. And there's actually another way to find your exact focus, and that's called by doing a ramp test. And that's what we'll show you here next.
So I just realized I never told you how to move the Z-axis up and down using your controller. So if we press the ZU button, our menu will pop up and our first choice will be Z move. And we can control the up-down movement with the left and right arrow keys. So if we press right, the Z-axis will go down. If we press left, the Z-axis will go up. So now we can grab our focal gauge and reference it off the top of the frame here and lower the Z-axis until the bottom of the focal gauge is touching the top of the workpiece. So now we'll be in focus. So for the ramp test, we're actually going to build a ramp. And we're going to do that by taking some scrap material and stacking it, and then taking our ramp and leaning that on our scrap material so it's at an incline. So we're going to take the tip of the laser nozzle and we're going to put it directly over the top of the ramp, to where it's almost touching. So it's going to have it hover over there. Be careful not to have your ramp interfere with the frame of the laser, but we want it to be fairly close to where it's about a 1/2 millimeter off. And then we need to change our power settings. This is going to be the power settings for our pulse. So if we click on max power, you'll see that it's set at 60%. So all we have to do is move the directional key over and then the directional key down, and that changes it to 50%, and that's probably what we want. So if you press the ZU button, it changes to the next option, max power 2. Those need to match, so make that 50. And then just press enter, and that changes the settings. So now we're ready to strike a line on our ramp, and we're going to do that by simultaneously pressing pulse and holding it while also holding the right arrow key. And what that will do is it will strike a line all the way across the ramp. So again, we're going to hold pulse, hold to the right, and let go. Do you see the line that it struck? So if I zoom in here and show you, it's kind of hard to tell on the camera, but the line starts from where it pulsed to be really thick, then it gets thin, and as it moves down, it gets thick again. And somewhere in the middle is where our thinnest cut, our focus, is going to be. So it's probably right around here. So now I'm going to grab a pencil and I'm going to carefully mark where I think the thinnest part of the line is going to be. And I'm going to be careful not to move the ramp, otherwise I'll have to redo the ramp test. So now move the laser head right over the mark you just made, and that's going to be where we measure the focal distance. Now be careful not to move the ramp again, otherwise we'll have to redo this over. So there might be a better way for this part, but for me, I used my caliper's depth gauge to measure the distance from the tip of the laser to the top of the workpiece. So let's go ahead and zero this out. And we're going to use the depth gauge to measure that distance. So now we're looking at it through the side with the tray pulled out. I'm going to use my caliper's depth gauge, and I'm going to sit right where that mark is, and I'm going to drop my calipers until it's planar with the tip of the laser nozzle. And that's where I'm going to pull my measurement from. So now we have our measurement, which appears to be 8.19 millimeters. And what this means is the distance from the tip of our laser nozzle to the top of our workpiece is our focal distance. So now we could take this measurement and we can go and cut ourselves an 8.2 focal gauge to set up our focal distance on any size material, any thickness material, because it doesn't matter, because you're always referencing the tip of the laser and the top of the workpiece.
So I just wanted to show you as an example, this is a focal gauge that I use on my 80-watt OMTech laser, and my focal distance is 18 millimeters. So I set the tip of my laser on the top of this gauge while the bottom of this sits on the top of the material. And so I know that this is my focal distance. This is where I will get the sharpest point in my line. So we can do the same thing for this laser nozzle, right? Now that we know that our focal distance is an 8.2. So we can go into lightburn and create an 8.2 millimeter gauge. You can do a square, or you can do a focal gauge where it has steps like this, but really pretty simple to do, and a quicker way to set your focus every single time rather than messing with the offsets in lightburn. All right, guys, so that was a ton of information. I tried my best to explain it as simple as possible, but if you found any part of it particularly confusing, just let me know in the comment box below and I'll try my best to give you a detailed answer. Now, you can see this cord kind of just hangs out and the box just kind of rests on top. So I didn't have time to create a box for this. So that's where some of your guys' creative minds will come into place, to where maybe you can mount it on the front like this, mount it on the top, just so it's kind of out of the way, unless you like having it loose like this. So anyways, if you guys found this video helpful, as always, please give it a thumbs up. And if you're interested, go ahead and subscribe. Until then, we're going to keep putting out more content regarding the Polar and maybe the 80 watt OMTech that I have as well. So till then, guys, I'll catch you next time.